By the acquiring of declarative knowledge and hard-sought experiences, the apprentice becomes street savvy and clicked on. And by doing so, he answers one of life's more pressing questions. Is the game on him or in him? With the answer being the latter and not the former, he now sees the plight and the dilemma of so many who have become caught in a recurring existence of pulling up the red lights that will never turn green. Because in this game called life,
if you can't spot the sucker in your first half hour at the table, then you are the sucker.
Checkmate. What's good, everybody? My name is Neil K. Marcellus. Welcome to another episode of the Chronicles of Gameology, where the concept of game is understood both as an art and a science. Knowledge of the art is the science. Application of the art is the art. With that being said, it was stated at the beginning of this video that if one finds themselves sitting at a table and within a certain period of time unable to recognize who's the sucker, then most likely they are that sucker. The table represents entanglements, situations, involvement that we constantly in and out of, but also it spoke to the necessity of having a quality level of street savviness, the ability to recognize conniving situations. To add validity to what I just stated, in a 2010 Men's Health magazine article, they interviewed several individuals about disparaging situations that they were involved with prior to the interview, and over 80% of the men had a nonchalant view towards those situations. This speaks to a large percentage of men is not understanding the conniving individuals that's sitting around particular tables, because apparently they're not understanding a basic one-on-one I receive on a sidewalk university, where I cut my teeth on learning the concept of street savviness. Because when you step on the board of life, the chessboard of life, you have to understand and realize that.
But the game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
Now, in order to participate, you must understand the players on the board. Therefore, let me continue doing you a solid and introduce to you the characters and players on the shiesty board that are responsible for orchestrating all conniving and treacherous situations that you will encounter in life. These is referred to as shiesty tactics. I refer to them also as the squad of six. These particular shiesty tactics and characteristics represents a internal situation as well as a external. Internally, they ravage and roam around your psyche, causing mishap, causing you to miscalculate, use faulty logic, etc. Externally, they represents characters in certain social settings that is orchestrating as we speak in your life situations that is geared towards undermining you. It is incumbent upon all practicing gameologists to have a working understanding of these six characteristics. Shiestyism can be said is derived from a quote that goes, "The game is either on you or in you." When the game is on an individual, this speaks to a character who is in a state of pretending, so to speak, not representing the square that they claiming they're standing on. I was taken under the wing by a more seasoned OG in my early years, and he was responsible of smoothing out the rough edges at that particular time. And he pointed out that a lot of my partners who I kicked it with, that the game will only be on them and never in them. In pointing that out, I was able to peep a lot of destructive behavior that was a result of the game only being on them. Shystyism plays off your discrepancies. And this is not to have a goody two shoes type of mentality. This is only to point out that if you got discrepancies, then a shysty individual will utilize those discrepancies against you. And one of the discrepancies that is frowned upon within the game is being dishonest and lying. As a result, within the code and the rules of the game, it's a saying that goes, the game is by choice and not by force. Basically what this speaks to is the difference between having a code versus having a commandment. Because a code is based upon utility. A commandment is based upon some fictitious authority prescribing that upon you. On the account of what I just stated, talking about the dishonest and how that plays into a shysty situation, I like to point out from a scientific point of view how discrepancies of lying and dishonesty affects your brain, which throws you into a more shysty situation that allows you to be utilized by a more skillful tactician dealing with shystyism. In the psychology division at the University of Notre Dame, they did a study how dishonesty affected the brain and the memory. Within a few minutes of telling a lie, understand this, what I'm about to share with you. Within a few minutes of telling a lie, your brain struggles to maintain a track record of what you know versus what you said. The stress from cooking up a story causes your nervous system to secrete this chemical called cortisol that causes you to have lapse in memory, faulty judgment, awkward behavior, etc. You see, reality is comprehended by recognizing the components of cause and effect. To be a gameologist, you are basically a reality whisperer. Therefore, the more your brain is inundated with this cortisol, it severs your ability to connect the dots. Your inability to connect the dots causes you to have a lack of mental dexterity. I spoke about that in one of my other videos. To illustrate this fact of how this discrepancies shows up and causes you to fumble on the game of life or in the game of life, I will utilize a iconic movie that is looked upon by all gameologists as a thesis on recognizing the realities by which the chessboard plays itself out in life and in your own psychology. And that particular iconic movie is referred to as Godfather 2. Peep game. In this particular clip, Al Pacino, who played Michael in this movie, who was a mafia don, introduced a character by the name of Johnny Ola. He introduced this individual to his brother, who he suspected of being responsible in helping set up an assassination attempt earlier in the film that transpired. When he introduced Johnny Ola, who he already knew who was shiesty to his brother. They played like they didn't know one another. And when you look at this particular scene, peep out the body language, the awkward body language. Anytime when you have discrepancies within your understanding or your memory, then basically what you're conceiving and what your actions is implementing, there's a discrepancy. And this is what produces this awkwardness. And on the other side of this particular clip, we will pick it up from there.
That you got. Con gusto, you got it.
Johnny, you don't know my brother Fredo, do you, Johnny? Johnny Ola, Fredo.
We never met. Johnny Ola. Pleasure. Gentlemen?
In thinking about the objective of this particular channel, which is to provide clarity on the concept of game and gameology itself, it prompted me to a time when I recall having a conversation with that OG who I mentioned earlier in this video. He said to me one time, tricks well mastered are called techniques, and techniques have learned are merely tricks. That particular conversation, it impacted me because it set the tone and the rhythm on what the playing field of the concept of game required from a practitioner. That quote that I just spoke of speaks to the quality of one's participation. Viewing it from the perspective and the context of shiestyism and the squad of six, it's another reason why the game frowns upon the behavior of dishonesty. Because the barrier to entry in order to be conniving is so fucking low. A child can do it. Like that quote I just mentioned states, quality of participation produces skill. And this is the reason why the game requires a practitioner to develop their persuasion skills versus their conniving skills. Because the bar to entry is so fucking high. But I digress. Having said that, let's move on to this second and final clip. In this particular scene, it's only when Fredo, the brother to the Mafia Don, Michael, who is played by Al Pacino, Fredo reveals that he knows Johnny Ola, the individual that Michael already have pegged as being shiesty. And after hearing this, Michael, played by Al Pacino, comes to realize that his own flesh and blood had a hand in setting him up in order to be assassinated. After we watch this particular clip, we will pick it up on the other side.
I don't believe it.
That thing's gotta be a fake. It ain't no fake, that's real. That's why they call him Superman.
Hey, where did you find this place?
Johnny Ola told me about this place. He brought me here. I didn't believe it, but seeing is believing, huh?
I see it and I still don't believe it.
$50, Pat. Old man Roth had never come here, but old Johnny knows these places like the back of his hand. Now watch him, he's gonna break the cracker with us.
Break a cracker? I want to see him break a brick. He could knock down a building.
Like that,
Man. You know what? The saddest thing about having a rug snatched from up under your feet, other than a fall, is that it never comes from your enemies. Two things to keep in mind regarding the squad of six. Minion, shyster, scapegoat, so-called victim, etc. They have several chapters that make up their composition. On this channel, we will be diving exclusively into their makeup because shiesty tactics is a necessity if you want to be a thorough gameologist. And also, the squad of six never work in isolation. They always work in teams. The main reason why I utilize those two clips from The Godfather Part 2 is because it highlights and shines a spotlight on how shystyism utilizes an individual's own faults for its own betterment and elevation. Still yet, let me point out the fuckery that existed prior to Fredo being recruited by the enemies of his brother in order to assist them in his attempted assassination. And he was utilized as a poison pawn. The concept of a poison pawn, just think about it in terms of the so-called victim on the squad of 6. That's synonymous with a poison pawn. Also, I want to point out and throw it back to a point I made earlier in the video about when you are dishonest and you have that shysty bug flowing through you, is that if you're not seasoned, you have a great tendency of not connecting the dots, leaving blind spots in your discussions and things of this nature. This produces what you call a mental condition of antagonism, where the individual has a tug of war with the benefits of lying and the consequence of lying. Back to Fredo. Fredo had faulty characteristics existing inside him prior to being approached by his brother enemies. Basically what Fredo, the type of shysty characteristics that Fredo had within him, within the street, we refer to these as being a lack of the 4 C's. In order for a man to stand on his square, he must possess these 4 C's. Confidence in his ability, confidence in his capacity, confidence in his knowledge, and confidence in his experience. Anytime a man is standing on his square and he is stable, these 4 C's has been established and securely tethered to actuality and know-how. But when one of these particular C's is lacking, then it put pressure upon his character. Finally, my book that is due out by the spring of this year, I will dive heavily into how shystyism pulls and use certain levers in order to maneuver you in order to be a poison pawn. Very important thing I want you to walk away with. These shysty tactics, this squad of 6, do not conceive of these as being evil. That's a very elementary way of looking at things, and is a surefire way to find yourself in the hyena's den when dealing with a shysty individual. In conclusion, a street savvy practitioner knows that trust is earned, respect is always given, and loyalty is demonstrated. Betrayal of any one of these I just mentioned is to lose all 3. Checkmate. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next episode.